mentioned, the topic of today's presentation is related to the DORA Act, the Digital Operational Resilience Act, and in particular to the subject of pooled audits of ICT service providers, which is in terms of at the level of the regulations, we may say quite a new subject. So basically what we are doing now at the Polish Banks Association, but also what is being done currently in other countries is something very new, something we could call uncharted land. So yeah, I'm very, very happy to be here today and to be able to present you and tell about a couple of words about how these pooled audits can work, why they can work, why they should work, why they are important, and also what are the key challenges in them and how these can be overcome. So as I mentioned, I'd like to start with a very short recapitulation on the DORA Act, just to make sure that we have a common understanding of the regulatory framework here. Then I would move to the changes made by DORA Act in terms of the third-party risk oversight. Then I'll go to the pooled audits themselves, and I will try to convince all of you that they actually matter, because they can solve quite a big challenge that financial institutions are facing now. But also exactly what are the challenges that need to be overcome, and what are the currently observable models across Europe. Then I will move to the part of the presentation that I am the most personally attached to, that is the initiative of pooled audits, which is led by Polish Bank Association, which I am proud to be a part of, and I will try to explain to you the rationale behind it, and the basic rules that we follow, the governance model, the audit process itself, and the methodology that we use for the ICT service provider audits. And as most of the presentations end with, I will finally move to the summary or the key takeaways. So without any further ado, let's move to the first part, that is the Digital Operational Resilience Act. This act was started to be in force on 17th of January 2025, basically last year. So it is in force for about 14 months by now. Which means that in theory, all of the institutions that are subject to it should already be mature in terms of fulfilling all of its requirements. How the practice looks like, it differs, we may say, but it differs not because the financial institutions didn't do their work. The two very important factors here are, first of all, the fact that sorry, the fact that the regulatory framework under the DORA Act, it is not only the resolution itself, but there's plenty of other accompanying delegated acts, such as regulatory technical standards for third-party risk management, for incident management, for ICT risk management, etc. Then we have implementing technical standards regarding, for example, the scope of information about each service provider that need to be registered and maintained by financial institutions. And most of these acts were not available at for most of the time when DORA was before coming into force. Some of them were published very, very late. So this also means that also means that the competent authorities for DORA did not have much time to actually present to the supervised institutions what does these regulations mean in terms of the local nationwide regulations, such as Polish Banking Act, for example, or similar acts in other European countries. And again, this leads to the situation right now that even though the institutions claim and have basis for claiming that they are DORA compliant, still what will be the regulatory assessment on that is not very clear yet. And the other very important factor in terms of DORA implementation was that DORA implementation was not to be done by the financial institutions themselves only, but it required very extensive cooperation and changes to the cooperation between the financial institutions and their ICT service providers. Because if we look at the core pillars of DORA, as we have them here, I can see that there are five pillars that form the DORA expectations. So this is ICT risk management framework, basically everything that needs to be taken into account regarding the ICT risk, how it should be managed, how it should be controlled. Then we have incident management and reporting, which is kind of similar to, for example, PSD incident reporting framework or GDPR incident reporting framework in terms of the general principles. But if we go deeper to the actual scope of information of what needs to be reported and also scope of the incident that need to be covered by this incident management framework, this is obviously different from the other regulations, different in different to some extent and similar to some extent at the same time. So this is again something that that needs to be properly taken into account while implementing DORA. Then we have digital operational resilience testing, another very important part of DORA, which requires most of the requirements to be properly tested. It includes, of course, things like business continuity plans, incident management plans, but also covers testing like threat-led penetration testing, or, and this is important, testing and assurance regarding the fourth pillar here, that is the ICT third-party risk management, which is actually also the focus pillar of our presentation today. And then we have the last part that is information sharing, because DORA also states or gives a foundation for sharing information about cybersecurity and ICT risk between the financial institutions. So what is important again here is that the requirements for ICT, for the third-party risk management are deeply defined in DORA, and this is something that also needs to be tested. And this is also something that we will go through in the following parts of the presentation. One more important thing to mention here is that DORA is a lex specialis to the NIS2 directive, which means that financial institutions which are listed as one of the sectors covered by the Network and Information Security Directive version 2 actually need first of all need to follow the DORA requirements, and if they fulfill the DORA requirements, then they will also be compliant with NIS2. The scope of DORA directive, the scope of DORA resolution is wide. It obviously addresses institutions across the whole European Union. Only in Poland itself, there are over 1,300 institutions included in the scope. Also, if we speak about the institutions, these are banks, these are insurance companies, payment institutions, investment firms, market infrastructure, and other types of financial entities. Obviously, these entities differ from large universal banks, for example, on one end, to some small, for example, investment firms which employ only something like 10 employees. Good thing here is that DORA establishes also a risk-based approach, which is also called proportionality rule, saying that depending on the size of the organization and its risk profile, the way how the institutions fulfill the requirements can and should differ. So basically, they are properly addressing the actual risks that in terms of ICT that the institution is facing. In terms of the this is in terms of the financial institutions which are directly addressed by DORA, but the other type of entities that is also impacted by DORA are the ICT service providers, and these kind of entities are actually impacted on 3 layers, because first of all of ICT service providers need to be covered, and risks related to them need to be covered by all of the financial institutions on some level of assurance. Then we have the second layer, which is about giving or putting more effort and more focus in terms of risk management to those ICT service providers that support critical or important functions of financial institutions. And then we have the third layer, which is about critical ICT service providers, which are first of all subject to direct oversight by competent authorities. There is a separate separate sub-framework of oversight for those critical ICT service providers. Those critical ICT service providers are identified and listed by European supervisory authorities. At this moment, I think there are 18 such organizations that should be or are considered critical ICT service providers. And as I said, these are directly supervised by supervisory authorities, but this doesn't mean that such critical ICT service providers and risk related to them doesn't need to be managed also at the level of financial institutions. So, having said that, I think we can move to more details on the DORA implemented changes to the third-party ICT risk oversight. So first of all, we can say here that there is an expectation shift in terms of the overall regulatory framework that aims at ICT risk, because DORA is for the first time in European regulations, there is such a big focus put on managing risks related to third parties and risk resulting from usage of third-party services on the ICT risk on the level of financial institutions. DORA explicitly requires a multi-layered assurance model for managing risk related to each and every of the ICT service providers. So there are a couple of control means that need to be taken, that need to be used here, starting from receiving information and analyzing the information provided by ICT service providers, through monitoring of performance of services and key control indicators related to those ICT service providers. Then we have reporting of incidents and of service quality done by the service providers and the need for those to be analyzed by financial institutions. And then we have the most important topic in terms of our presentation, that is independent reviews and audits. This is the key point here, that also need to be performed by financial institutions or other parties appointed by the audits that need to be performed against the ICT service providers by either financial institutions themselves or some other parties appointed by the financial institutions. What is important here, and this and it's also explicitly stated by DORA and by one of the regulatory technical standards to DORA, is that financial institutions cannot rely only on certifications or audit reports provided by third parties themselves. It basically means that especially when we talk about ICT service providers that support critical or important functions under DORA, they need to be audited by the financial institutions or appointed third parties, but still this cannot be some form of control which is done by the service provider, and only that the financial institution is informed about the results of such a control. This is definitely not enough under DORA, but this again leads to some very important structural challenges. So if we imagine the overall market or the overall ecosystem of financial institutions and their service providers, we can easily see that there are many institutions that rely on large numbers of providers. Like, for example, if we take some big banks, it's quite common that they rely on services of 200 or even 400 ICT service providers. At the same time, many providers provide or render their services to large numbers of institutions, and also they support critical and important functions. So this basically means that each financial institution should perform big number of audits against their service providers, and at the same time multiple service providers would be or should be subject to multiple audits. So if we took an approach with single audited entity and single audit, if we took an naive approach when each institution audits all of its service providers, and each service provider is audited by all of its clients, then basically everyone would be either performing audits or being audited instead of providing the financial services or providing the ICT services. So that's why pooled audits come here as a solution, as a viable and scalable solution. And the good thing about DORA is that it at least it states that pooled audits are one of the potential means of such an independent control or independent audit mentioned here. So having said that, you can see that pooled audits may help financial entities to respond to the DORA requirements in terms of third-party risk management in a scalable and structured way, while also considering the provider's perspective in terms of the burden on them resulting from the control activities done by the financial institutions. So basically, we can say that pooled audits can lead to reduction of duplicate audit efforts across financial entities. At the same time, they will hopefully enable for reduction of audit fatigue on the provider's side. They can provide more efficient access to competent auditors with relevant technical expertise, because obviously when we have audits to be performed, those audits can only be done by auditors of which the number of the auditors that can do that is obviously limited. So if there are too many audits being done at the same time, then we don't have enough audit resources to perform the audits. On the other hand, if we did these audits one by one, the audit cycle would be just too long to enable for sufficient number of ICT service provided to be audited. So again, this is where the pooled audits can help. Another advantage of pooled audits is that they enable for consistency and better comparability of the audit outputs, which is important for the financial institutions themselves, of course, but also for also from the supervisory perspective, and also from the perspective of the ICT service providers, because if the ICT service provider is audited by multiple institutions only once during the pooled audit, then it is there is a big decrease of the risk that the audit findings or the audit recommendations will be will not be coherent between each other. Also, hopefully that pooled audits will enable for enhancing the auditing maturity or overall third-party risk management because of the natural knowledge sharing process embedded in the pooled audit idea. Also, again, this is something that we just covered. I think that the pooled audits will actually increase the feasibility, the actual operational feasibility of exercising the audit rights, because I think without pooled audits, the requirement to execute the audit rights could remain just as a requirement being on paper, but without its actual execution. Also, what is important is that pooled audits can increase the negotiating power for financial institutions and help creating the actual impact on providers, in particular when we consider the large pan-European or worldwide providers, ICT providers. The other, I think, obvious advantage is more efficient usage of resources, basically time, budget, and specialists. And last but not least, all of that can and hopefully will lead to increased resilience of financial institutions and of ICT service providers, which is basically the ultimate aim also of the DORA regulation itself. So on the previous slide, we could see the advantages and why why is it worth to use the pooled audits, but at the same time, especially comparing to single entity audits, there is a couple of important constraints or challenges in terms of law, in terms of the contracts, and in terms of organizational models that come into that can easily become something that needs to be managed properly in terms of pooled audits. So first of all, as I mentioned before, DORA recognizes pooled audits as a mean for ICT for third-party risk management and provider control, but it doesn't give almost but it doesn't give almost no specific requirements or details on the operational model about how these pooled audits should work. So this leads to a situation where all of these operational aspects need to come or be defined in the field, and hoping that this will remain compliant with the regulatory expectations when they will become more visible. So first of all, there is no or very little regulatory criteria regarding the expected approach to pooled audits, and also to how the outcomes of such pooled audits should look like. I'll get to that in some more details later during this presentation. The other thing is that there are no robust means of influence between the joint auditors, basically the firms the organization that perform the pooled audits, and the service providers. Yeah, because since there is no specific legal requirements on that, this is something that actually needs to be defined separately for every audit, actually. So the next issue or challenge is that there are no standards established for agreements between audited providers and joint auditors. This is something that, for example, within the Polish Banks Association initiative, we identified that, and we are currently working or finalizing the model clauses for such agreements between the pool auditor and the audited entity, or namely the ICT service provider. The other challenge is to ensure compliance with competition law requirements, in particular to avoid any situation that could be seen as something antitrust or creating cartels, because what is obviously a part of pooled audits is that we need to combine the needs, the views, and the expectations of multiple financial entities being clients to a single ICT service provider. So if the discussions between if the discussions between the financial entities go too wide, this could be seen as in compliance with the antitrust laws, and this could be something that very risky for the whole market and for the institutions themselves. So this is something that we need for all the time. We need to keep that in mind to avoid any of such situations. The other thing is that the other challenge is that we need to preserve confidentiality in a complex multiple stakeholder environment, which, for example, means that if we have any audit observations, the pooled auditor needs to very carefully consider such observations and verify whether this is applicable to all of the audit participants, or maybe just to a couple of them, or maybe just to one of them. So the confidentiality here is something that is way more complex than in a situation where such an audit would be performed for just one institution. Then we have challenges related to differences in contractual clauses on audit rights, because the audit right itself, the right to audit a given ICT provider by a given financial institution, this is not something that comes directly from DORA, but this is something that DORA requires the financial institutions to ensure that the audit right is something they have in the contracts with their service providers. And obviously, the actual clauses on the audit right sometimes differ between the financial institutions. So we might have situations where the audit process, for example, the audit process or any constraints regarding the audit right are different between different audit participants, and this is something that needs to be managed on a case-by-case basis during each audit. Then we also need to make sure every time that the auditors act impartially, act objectively, and act with independence. This is obvious, especially I guess for us as ISACA members, on one hand, but on the other hand, when we think or when we consider the other constraints, in particular the constraints with the limited number of auditors that we have available for the audits, and at the same time we need to ensure, for example, the independence, then it means that for each audit the need or the process of ensuring that each auditor involved in such an audit is independent and will be objective and will ensure impartiality. This is also something that needs to be properly embedded in the whole process of auditing. Then we have also challenges or some difficulties sometimes with defining the audit scopes, proper audit scopes for each audited entity that consider the needs of different financial institutions that the audit is performed for. And also something that I already mentioned, that we have important level of asymmetry in negotiating power between the audit participants and large ICT service providers, but also between the joint auditor and the ICT providers. This asymmetry is, except for the market, except I mean, leaving aside the market conditions, this is also a result of something that I already shown here, that there are at this moment there are not very detailed. Not much details on the model of performing such pooled audits. So hopefully this will change in the future, but for now we need to try to overcome this on a case-by-case basis, basically. Moving further, how most of these challenges that I just mentioned can be or should be overcome. Basically, what the situation that we have in most of the cases is that for the joint auditors, do not have any contractual agreement or relationship with the audited ICT service providers, which leads to conclusion that probably such writing down such agreements, concluding such agreements, is a good way, or the only reasonable way to overcome those challenges. So if we think of what matters, what issues need to be agreed on in a written form between the joint auditor and the audited third party or the audited service provider, is first of all the basis for launching the audit, because we can say here that we have the DORA requirements that state that there is this audit right, but we need to dive deeper. We need to use very specific audit clauses that are in place in the agreements between ICT service providers and their clients. But also we have situations which, again, DORA requires to do that, but doesn't say anything on how this should be done. Basically, DORA requires such audits not only to be performed during the existence of the cooperation, during the service provision, but also during the due diligence process before starting the cooperation between financial institution and the service provider. So in such cases, there is no basis for launch the audit other than the actual consent of the audited service provider to be subject to such an audit. So this is something that definitely needs to be covered by such an agreement. Then what needs to be defined are the principles for the audit team composition that, as I mentioned before, that ensure the impartiality of each of the members, of their objectivity and their independence. Then obviously the principles for ongoing cooperation, such as what forms of communication will be used, what are the expected formats of data to be exchanged, and so on. Then what we need to agree on, and this is sometimes can be tricky, are the actual consequences, or defining the consequences of non-performance with the other elements of this agreement, of such agreements, because obviously when there are no consequences, then none of the other elements of such an agreement would be actually enforceable. But at the same time, neither the providers nor the joint auditors want to face such a consequences. So yeah, this is something again that can be time consuming to agree on, but this I think this can be done as well. Then principle for determining the audit scope or the audit scope itself. This is again something very tricky because what DORA says is that financial institutions need to audit their ICT service providers, but it doesn't say, at least directly, anything about how what should be the scope of such an audit, independently of whether it is a pooled audit or a single entity audit. This can be found in DORA, but actually this needs following quite a long path of the dependencies between multiple delegated acts and the DORA resolution itself. I will get to that in a couple of minutes when I move to the audit methodology, and hopefully I will be able to show you that this is not very obvious, and this leads to a situation when, for example, the audited third parties, the audited ICT providers might say that, why do you want to check my financial stability if this is not an ICT risk and nothing is said about my financial stability in the contracts between me and my clients? And this is something that needs to be carefully explained to the providers so that they actually understand why sometimes the audit scope is such wide, and basically why do we say that it is expected from the financial institutions to cover such a wide scope of aspects within the audits? The other important thing to be defined in the contract between a joint auditor and the audited ICT provider are principles for confidentiality and for information segregation. Then the principles for sharing the audit outcomes. Because I will not get into much details of that because we don't have too much time, but the audits can be, there can be situations when some pooled audit is performed on behalf of, let's say, 3 or 5 institutions, but then the results of the audit can be also used to develop an audit report for an institution that didn't participate in the initial audit, but uses the same scope of services that was already covered by such an audit, and potentially doesn't need to actually reperform the audit. But only in case that the scope was the scope is consistent, the scope of services is consistent with the scope of the audit, and that obviously the ICT service provider consents for sharing the audit outcomes with such an institution. And again, this is something that needs to be defined upfront. And again, last but not least, something that's important to also agree on before starting the audit is, or are the principles for audit reliance, because on one hand, the audited service provider may say, oh, I was already audited by my internal audit, by corporate audit, by some other companies, and I have the results of the audit, so maybe I will just show you the audit results, and you just take it and write it down that you checked you checked this, you read this, and And based on that, the joint auditor could make its assessment. But obviously, this is not compliant with the common sense and with the audit reliance rules. So what needs to be defined here is are the situations where relying on other audits can be used as a basis for this audits assessment, and what criteria should be met by those previous audits in order for them to be used as a basis for some parts of the assessment, because obviously not for they could not be the only basis for such an assessment. Moving forward to some one more important aspect of the pooled audits is the implications for internal control systems, because in a situation when the audit would be performed by the financial institution itself, and it would not be a pooled audit, then the situation is quite easy, because this audit is specifically defined for the institution itself, and it can be easily incorporated in the risk management framework of the institution. But when we have a situation when the audit is performed for multiple institutions, then we need to make sure, and the institute. Then we as a joint auditor need to make sure that the outcomes of the audit can be incorporated, properly incorporated by each of these institutions to their ICT risk management frameworks. And at the same time, those institutions need to make sure that they know what to do with the audit outcomes and actually will follow this proper path of incorporating the audit results, because one of the key regulatory expectations here is that the management body of each institution remains ultimately responsible for ICT risk management, including the risks arising from third-party service providers. And having said that, of course, the pooled audits do not transfer any responsibility in that matter away from the financial entities or the management body of such entity. So this means in particular that all of the financial institutions need to be properly engaged in the audit process, in particular during the preliminary risk assessment, during the audit scoping, and during the stage of finalizing the audit report. And they need to, as I just mentioned, they need to be able to properly translate or transpose the outcomes into inputs of their own risk management frameworks. We're quite short of time, so I will try to move quickly through some examples of the pooled audit models and their limitations. These are the actual models that are already growing up across European Union. I tried not to put any specific details or names of the organizations that do that, because but I think if someone wants, it will be very easy to find such examples. Basically, there are some audits being done by cloud providers, which invited groups of European financial institutions for such an audit, and those financial institutions hired an independent external auditor to perform such an audit. This is very helpful in terms of the operational feasibility, but at the same time, this can what is tricky here. The tricky part here is that such an audit can be strongly shaped by the provider and this is something that needs to be properly taken care of. I mean, again, the institutions need to make sure that they can prove that what was audited was their decision and not the ICT provider's decision. Then we have some initiatives. Coordinated by industry bodies, such as Polish Banks Association, but not only. And we can see that these kind of initiatives are also growing up in the European market. Then we have situations where some providers, for example, some cryptocurrency services providers, actually announced that in a given month they invite the financial institutions or their auditors, and they will be showing how they perform and how they control the emerging risks, the risks emerging from their operations. Again, this is something that simplifies the logistics of the process, and it can be easily started and easily done, I mean, proportionally easily, but at the same time, it doesn't fulfill the requirements from stated by DORA to not to rely solely on certifications or provider-supplied third-party reports, because this can be seen as something provider-supplied, and that's why this is definitely not enough. This can be helpful in terms of the third-party risk management, but this doesn't remove the obligation to actually perform the proper third-party audit and the proper provider audit. And we have some models where the ICT service providers put more and more effort on the certifications they have in order to show to their clients that they have those certifications, which is, again, helpful in terms of assessing the risk related to the usage of their services, but again, this doesn't remove the obligation to execute the actual audit right. Okay, so this last minutes, I will try to introduce you very briefly, quickly to the initiative in the Polish Bank Association that also is also aimed at providing aimed at providing the pooled audits for Polish financial institutions, not only banks, even though we are the Polish Bank Association, but also what we already have in scope are the insurance firms. We have leasing companies, and we also invite capital markets entities to join the initiative. At this moment, we have 26 agreements with financial institutions signed. So this is our current constituency, let's say. We have already started one audit, and we have 16 more audits planned for this year. Hopefully, we'll be able to start 4 audits each quarter, which means that hopefully by the end of March, we will start 4 more audits. And just a couple of words about the objectives and the operating model that we have. So what we are saying, what we are focusing on during the audits is to provide the participating financial institutions with information enabling them to incorporate provider-related risks into their own ICT risk management frameworks, including as required by the RTS to DORA, including operational risk, reputational risks, and other kinds of risks that the institutions themselves are required to consider while considering the risk related to the third party. And this is something that is quite a common misunderstanding, that it can be very often heard that the scope of audit of the ICT service provider should focus on the ICT risk on the side of the ICT service provider. And what I can say is this is not true. This is not true because if we take a look at the financial entity that uses the services of a given service provider, then if the service provider breaks down financially, or the service provider becomes listed company in terms of supporting terrorism or other AML related rights, then it might be not the ICT risk itself that happens, that materializes on the side of the provider, but it may and will, such situations will lead to ICT risk realization or materialization on the side of the financial institution itself, because the financial institution, for example, might need unexpectedly to stop using the ICT services of such a provider, even though it was not ICT risk that materialized on the provider side. So this is something very important to keep in mind while controlling the service providers for financial entities. Some governing rules, just very briefly. What we are doing is we have centralized the identification and planning of audited providers, but obviously we are basing this on the inputs collected from participating institutions. For each audit, the scope of the audit and the set of controls to be covered is it is done jointly, basing on the preliminary risk assessment of each provider. Obviously, the costs of the audits are shared amongst participants through agreed on rules. This is something that is proportional to the number of services that each audit participant uses from the service provider, but also there is some common part of the audit that is divided not proportionally, but just at the same level between each of the participating institutions. The responsibility for the process of the audit itself is assigned to Polish Bank Association, but as for the auditors themselves, there are auditors from the Polish Bank Association, and in particular, the audit is led by Polish Bank Association, and the audit reports are underwritten by Polish Bank Association, but there is also an involvement of external audit specialists in the form of body leasing. Then the other important rule here is that for each of the audit participants, there is a separate audit report being prepared by Polish Bank Association. Then, as for the post-audit activities, in particular, the monitoring of the audit recommendations, the idea is to have it centralized so that there is less burden on the provider side and also on the financial institution side. And obviously, we have already defined and in place mechanisms to address confidentiality, to address consistency, and to ensure operational discipline. As for the audit process, this is not something uncommon, so I think that I will not move to that because we are already out of time. Just three more minutes on that. As for the audit methodology, in order to ensure proper independence and proper segregation of duties, the development of the audit methodology was outsourced to Naval Cybersecurity Center in sorry, I forgot the English name, Akademia Marynarki Wojennej w Gdyni, which means Naval Academy in Gdynia. And the methodology itself is divided into two main parts. That is the generic module, which is something to be in general to be covered in all audits, and we have service-specific modules, obviously specific to given services that are provided by given audited entity. For example, ICT development or ICT consulting or incident management. They are defined in the implementing technical standard DORA. So as for the scoping, we start with the joint risk assessment, and using that we jointly define control prioritization, which enables us to create the risk-based audit scope, which is of course compliant with DORA, because DORA says that the scoping of the audits should be risk-based. What we are ultimately aiming is to reduce variability and avoid the one-size-fits-all approach. So this can be structured enough for joint execution, but also adaptable and useful at the level of the risk management framework of each of the participants that obtain the results or the outcomes of the audit. I will not go through that in detail. So what I just want to show here is that, for example, I mean, what you can see here on the left-hand side of this table are the areas of the generic module of the audit methodology, and you can see here like IT-related or security-related items, for example, incident management or configuration management. But you can also see here elements or areas such as human resources management or internal audit or knowledge management, which at the first glance might not seem very relevant to ICT risk. And yeah, they are not relevant to ICT risk on the provider side, but if we think about the potential consequences of materialization of this risk, this can significantly impact the ICT risk on the side of the financial entity. So, for example, if there is no proper knowledge management on the provider side, then, and for example, there is important knowledge concentrated by single individuals, then there might be delays in system recovery, or there might be some difficulties when it comes to execute the exit strategy. Okay, so I'm sorry for taking more time than expected, but this is, I promise, this is the last slide. So as for the key takeaways, I think there are 5 most important points from this presentation. So first of all, DORA has made the third-party ICT oversight something legally binding and very much demanding in terms of the operational model for financial entities. So this was a big challenge for the financial entities when it came to annexing or signing annexes or appendices to the contracts with ICT service providers during the implementation phase of DORA, but now this is also a big challenge in terms of actually executing the control or audit rights. The second important thing here is that in practice, individually exercising the audit rights by each financial institution might be very difficult to scale effectively. So that's why we can say that pooled audits can offer a viable and structured response to that challenge, but only if we keep all of the important constraints or challenges in mind in terms of the legal requirements, the contractual aspects, in terms of governing the whole model, and in terms of the audit methodology. We can already see that there are market examples showing that the pooled audits are possible, and can provide value to financial institutions, but depending on how the governance model and the operational model is defined for such initiatives, this can more or less help the institutions to address the actual regulatory requirements. And last but not least, the Polish Bank Association hopefully is already and will be an example of such a structured implementation model to respond to such challenges in practice. And I really hope that this can be helpful for both the financial sector and for the providers of ICT services. So thank you very much for your attendance today. Hopefully, if you have any questions, please feel free to contact me offline after the presentation. And yeah, have a great evening, and probably see you on some other ISACA events. Thank you very much.